like to think you deep and about deep space and ocean life and us. And basically, when you think about our Earth, and you probably have heard it named the marble, the blue marble or blue planet, please understand that our planet is habitable because it has ocean. And as you can see here, the ocean is a heat capacitor. It takes heat from the atmosphere. In fact, it has absorbed 90% of the warming that comes from climate change. These temperature differences, they make winds spin and turn, they make our climate, and whatever we do to the atmosphere will have a reflection in the ocean. So far, the ocean has kept us living happily on Earth. What keeps us happily living on Earth, too, are the millions of organisms in the sea. Here you see a satellite view of planet Earth. In green, you see the trees, the forests, the grassland on land. In the ocean, you also see green. These are unicellular organisms that are able to take the energy from sunlight and fix CO2. And when you now breathe in, you have to understand that we know today that 50% of the oxygen in your lung comes from these tiny little organisms. The other half from the trees and the grass, but 50% from the ocean. So the ocean at any time is a gigantic service to us, to society. But we are often very far remote from it, not only in Switzerland, which has no coastline, but everywhere we have forgotten about the central services that ocean does. The purpose of my talk today is to reconnect you for a little bit. So if only we could fly but deep, if we could dive, if we could explore the oceans, like in this little simulation of how water moves through the oceans, if we could think that the water goes away, as Ben showed us this morning, then we would discover these giant landscapes, mountains. In fact, we could take the Alps and throw them in the sea and they would be fully submarine. The ocean is deep, on average 4 kilometers. In some parts, it's 11 kilometers deep, and it really has amazing amounts of landscapes. When we calculate the volume where life inhabits Earth, 90%, more than that, 99% is actually that deep space where life takes place. So if you would be a Mars person and you would take a coincidental sample, chances are that you catch a deep sea organism, but maybe you don't know any. Nothing comes to your mind when you think about them. What really kicked off my fascination for deep sea life and deep sea research as such was reading the book by Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And in that book, I hope most of you have read it. If not, you have to go home and read it. 1869, Jules Verne wrote a fantastic story about a man, Captain Nemo, who is dissatisfied with society and hides out in the sea, and he has captured by chance a Professor Aronnax, and they talk. They like each other, kind of, though one is captain. And so Professor Aronnax asks, "You like the sea, Captain?" And Captain Nemo says, "Yes, I love it. The sea is everything. It covers 7/10 of the terrestrial globe. It's an immense desert where man is never lonely, for he feels life stirring on all sides." So that strange concept of a desert, lonely, but then teeming with life, that is the perfect description of what we encounter when we dive deep. The sea is the vast reservoir of nature. How could he have known that at that time when there was no deep ocean exploration? Just at his time, ocean exploration started, and basically every nation that was proud and rich sent out ships with people to test one scientific hypothesis, namely that there is life in the sea. It was not believed at that time. But scientists and explorers came home with jars filled with ocean life. You can see some of this here. You can go to the Museum of Natural History in Berlin, and you can see organisms, strange organisms in formalin, and some of them in rum, because scientists usually ran out on these ships in fixatives, and they took the barrels of rum from the sailors to fix all of the strange lives they encountered. But we humans, we need to experience life around us. We need to see more than a dead carcass in a glass to be connected, to understand that it's worthwhile thinking about these organisms. So the big difference that was made about discovery of ocean ecosystems, ocean life, was actually illumination, bringing light down to the deep darkness. Diving with robots, with submarines, with all kinds of instruments, whatever gets you a picture from the life down there, because you can't bring it back alive. Everything you bring back is destroyed. It's kind of exploded. Sometimes it's not looking good, and you don't understand what they are doing down there. So please, for a moment, imagine you're sitting with me in a submersible. They're always very small, so we squeeze inside, you look out, and we dive down. First it shakes, then we go to the quiet water outside of the wave zone, then sunlight gets extinguished by the water and it gets dark, and you ask the pilot, please don't turn on the light. I want to see how life communicates. I want to see the light that the organisms make in the deep sea. That's the most beautiful moment, and then at about 1,000 meters, some weird creatures come up, like this anglerfish, and you feel that you are on a different planet. You don't know this planet, but you're not alone. That's what happens to you when you sit in a submersible. So the anglerfish is the icon of the strangeness of deep sea life. You have probably seen it in books or in movies, and it looks first, the response is, "Boy, that's ugly, I don't want to meet that beast, not in my dreams." But when you think about it, it is beautiful. It has the perfect adaptation to coldness and darkness. It is blubber, it is fat and water, it has no spheres inside, it has a giant mouth, so it can sit there and wait for food to rain in because energy is limited. Also, it's very lonely in the deep sea because of the little energy. One slice of toast per square meter in year is the average energy that deep sea life has. Then it is perfect, it's perfectly well adapted for finding a mate. How does the anglerfish does that? Basically, it is so that the anglerfish, as we know them, is females only. It's girls, fish girls, sitting in the sea, and the men you cannot see. They are dwarfed. They are tiny dwarfs, and they have one purpose in life: find their perfect mothership. Once they have found a female, they will attach to it, and the enzymes will dissolute the skin of the male, connected to the skin of the female, and the female blood vessels will connect to the blood vessels of the male, and by blood transfer, it will make sure that the man is happy until it serves its purpose, fertilization. Afterwards, the wife resorbs the male because it can't waste any energy, and the male has done purpose. That's deep sea romance. I don't think there's no better love story than that. But deep sea life is so hard for us to grasp because we need to be there. We have to look at it. And most of that life is gelatinous. You can understand that these giant creatures, these jellyfish, can be meters in diameter. We can't catch them. We have to sit there and watch them. Who is paying us scientists money to go with submersibles and sit and watch them? That's not happening. But so we're missing the stories like this fantastic telescope fish, which tries really hard by evolution to become transparent. It has already managed to get its brain and head transparent. You can only see the nerves of the eye. It has telescope eyes. It's a fantastic organism, and if we come back in 1 million years, it may be fully transparent. Let's dive down to the seafloor. That's where organisms accumulate. We are going to the Mediterranean. Again, we are now sitting at the seafloor, and all of the life, some of that resembles what you eat or what you know from the surface, has adapted to capture the few particles that rain down from the sunlit surface of the ocean, like these deep sea corals. They are sticky. They capture the particles and eat them. This beautiful brittle star, it's a relative of a starfish, but it has changed. It's called the gorgon head. Each branch, normally 5, has radiated to capture more particles. Fish and crabs, they all eat sediments. They eat basically the remnants, the deposits, the detritus that sinks down to the seafloor. My favorite organism, the sea cucumber, is also a relative of the starfish. It sits there and stuffs itself with sediment. Why do they eat sediment? Because the seafloor, made up from detritus that rains down, is populated by bacteria. Lots and lots of them. 1 tablespoon of sediment has 1 billion cells in them, and these cells, they make lipids that these deep sea organisms need, that they can't make themselves. When we take a tablespoon and we look at the DNA and decode the DNA, we find 2,000 kinds of bacteria, deep sea bacteria. We go a kilometer ahead and take another teaspoon of sediment, we find 2,000 new ones. You have to understand that we are still explorers. We are far from knowing diversity of life on Earth. We have recently made one big step forward, and it is understanding that despite this gigantic diversity, there are few species which are the winner of the selection process. These bacteria that you see here, there's one type that is everywhere, just one type. And that one type is the most abundant one. It makes 20% of all those cells. It has a specific adaptation that we can't read out yet. but it knows something better than others, and it runs the element cycles of Earth. We have to find out what it is. Then, of course, I was challenged this morning by Ben Moore about where does life come from. There are places in the deep sea where new ocean crust, where new Earth crust forms, and it's inhabited by these strange organisms that we still don't understand how they're functioning. These worms, for example, they are buddy sacks to other bacteria that can take energy from deep Earth and change it into something, some sugary stuff that they feed to their host. So these places where life could have been born, those are fascinating to research, and many of the enzymes of organisms that we know today still harbor the sulfur, the iron that comes out from these original places where ocean crust is born that we call hydrothermal vents. In 2000, scientists all around the globe came together, and we were sponsored by private foundations for one task, that is a census of marine life. We had 10 years where we were founded to meet and discuss how best could we explore this planet ocean and find out the number of different species and how they live. You can see some of these most fabulous creatures that have been documented and filmed, like the blobfish, that's the favorite of our children, or these different, the Yeti crab, or some of these fantastic deep-sea octopus. We have not managed to describe all that lives in the sea, and we have far ways to go. And please understand that it is very strange that this type of science, this type of describing reality, understanding what lives on Earth today is not funded. It's exploratory science. It only works when foundations or private money comes, and we scientists can do something extra, something on top of our normal job of hypothesis-driven research. Why that is, I don't understand, and I would like that to be different. Because describing reality, that's the core task of science. Understanding how life functions and how it evolves has many answers to questions of what the future will hold or where life came from. What we have discovered is that all of these organisms are not distributed by coincidence. They aggregate and assemble by rules that we can understand. It has to do with landscapes that we call seascapes. Here you see a few pictures of these seascapes. And basically, when we put our knowledge together, what forms assemblages of these different types of life are the same rules as on land. Bathymetry changes, different types of temperatures, climate, seasonal changes in the sea, all of that selects for certain organisms. We can put all of that information together and simulate distribution of life in the sea, and then something surprises us a lot. That is that this original idea of this giant one ocean system, where we humans always tend to think one accident, one oil spillage, one area that gets destroyed by deep-sea fisheries doesn't matter because it's so big and the organisms have such a big space to go and retreat to. That is not true. The ocean has small ecosystems and habitats just as on land. This is the map of the distribution of ecoregions, so larger than a habitat that we can see. And so one accident, one change, one usage of seafloor actually changes the way that we can think about preserving species and finding them again. If you take samples in any of these regions, you will find organisms that are unique, that have never been described before and will never be sampled again. That's at least the current status of knowledge. So the big quest that we are facing with this exploration of the deep space of Earth is we really need to be able to observe. How do we do that? Of course, it doesn't make sense if you take all ocean scientists and put them into submersibles and they hang out there and watch. They would have to do that for hundreds of years. But technology allows us to send robots to automate this process of discovery and visualization. Technology is there, but it takes an effort of international cooperation and science funding to do that. Just a few thoughts at the end of my talk. You think we are remote from the ocean, but in reality, 90% of the world trade is shipped. There are ships everywhere, and here the satellite view shows you where ships are, and you can see there are really autobahn. There are high-speed roads where ships conglomerate. There are areas where there are not so many ships, but in theory there are ships everywhere that could launch our robots or pick them up. if we would find a way to discuss the uses of ship, not only for shipping, but also for observations. We have sensors we can put on ships. We have programs that have started trying this, but it needs, of course, a much better interaction. We are also using the deep sea. And you may not know that 99% of our telecommunication, of our international telecommunications, is via sea cables. Those are going through the deep sea. Everywhere you have cables that have energy and that have bandwidth. If we scientists would be allowed to connect to these cables and use some of that bandwidth, we could change the way that we see and observe the ocean. There are first attempts to do this, to organize this with telecommunication companies, but they would have to take a big risk because, of course, there are scientists that try to plug in something that probably works best right now if it's left alone. But there is a great chance to come together and do this. And finally, the big question between us and this deep life that I showed you, what would you do to know that you can live on with that kind of life, or that you can preserve that kind of life for the future? One big question is that we haven't solved today: who owns the ocean and who has to take care of the ocean? Of course, the ocean is constantly changing. It's very dynamic. When we change the surface, just because of that detritus is falling, nourishing the deep sea, when we change the surface, the deep sea will change along. And so what I do right now, namely visiting the Arctic, documenting climate change in the Arctic, I can see already how the deep sea changes at an instant together with the ice at the surface. So who owns the ocean? 38% is owned by all nations, with the economic zones that you see here in lines around the continents or around the islands. But 62% is common heritage. That is at least the law that nations have subscribed to. The high seas belongs to all of us. If you would get a better feeling of what lives inside and what good it does and how much it is a reservoir of life to the future, then maybe you would like to take your share of thinking about it and protecting it. Thank you.